David Chin pressed his hands against the reinforced glass of the cockpit window, watching the orange and red planet grow larger as his ship descended through the atmosphere. The solar storm had come without warning, ripping through his vessel's navigation systems like a knife through paper. Now, with all his training and 15 years of experience as a xenobiologist, he was about to crash on Zephyr 7, a world so hostile that even looking at its data files made experienced space explorers nervous. The ship shook violently. Alarms screamed from every direction. David gripped the control stick, trying desperately to level the aircraft, but it was no use. His instruments flickered and died. The planet below rushed up to meet him with terrifying speed. David closed his eyes for just a moment, thinking of his sister back on Earth, thinking of all the things he would never get to say to her. Then came impact. The crash was worse than anything he had imagined. Metal twisted and screamed. Glass shattered. David felt the terrible lurch of his body being thrown forward, then sideways. His harness cut into his chest as it caught him mid-flight. For a moment that lasted forever, he tumbled through space and time in pain. Then everything went black. When David woke up, smoke was pouring into the cabin. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He tasted blood in his mouth. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting everything in a sickly red glow. David unbuckled his harness with shaking hands and stumbled out of the cockpit, checking his suit for tears or leaks. Miraculously, it had held. He was alive. He grabbed his emergency pack, water, rations, a medical kit, a basic weapon, and stepped out into Zephyr 7 for the first time. The air was thick and hot, even through his suit's climate control. The sky above was a strange purple-blue color, and the sun hung in the sky like a massive orange eye watching him. Everything around him was wrong. The ground itself seemed to shimmer and shift. Tall crystalline formations jutted from the red sand, some of them as tall as buildings. They caught the light in impossible ways, throwing rainbows across the barren landscape. David checked his scanner. Radiation levels were higher than expected but manageable. No immediate signs of life. He needed water. His ship's reserves could last him maybe 3 days, possibly 4 if he rationed carefully. After that, he would need to find a natural source or he would die on this alien world alone. He began walking toward a canyon formed between 2 massive crystal formations. His boots crunched on the sand. The sound seemed too loud in the vast emptiness. Every step felt heavy, like he was walking on a different world with different gravity. Maybe he was. David had studied the data on Zephyr 7, but being here was something else entirely. It was overwhelming and terrifying and strangely beautiful all at once. As he approached the canyon, David heard something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was a sound, high-pitched and desperate, echoing off the crystal walls. It sounded almost like crying. David had spent his entire career studying alien life forms, but he had never heard anything quite like this. His heart beat faster. He moved cautiously toward the sound, his hand moving to the weapon at his side, though he knew it would probably be useless against anything large enough to be a real threat. The canyon opened up into a small cavern. David stepped inside, and his eyes took a moment to adjust to the dimmer light. That's when he saw it. A creature lay trapped beneath a massive boulder, the kind that must have fallen during some ancient rockslide. The animal was unlike anything David had ever seen, even in all his years of study and preparation. Its fur was silver, not gray but actually silver, shimmering like liquid metal in the light filtering through the crystal formations. The creature had 4 powerful limbs, and its head was covered with multiple eyes, arranged in a perfect semicircle around what must have been the front of its face. Each eye was a different shade of blue, from pale sky blue to deep ocean blue. Its teeth, visible as it gasped for breath, were made of something crystalline that caught the light. It was a young alien lion. A cub. The creature's eyes fixed on David, and in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Or desperation. The cub was clearly injured. One of its front limbs bent at an unnatural angle, and there was blood matted into its silver fur. Its breathing came in shallow, pained gasps. David knew what the protocol said. Do not interact with apex predators. Observe from a distance. Report findings to command. Let nature take its natural course. But as he looked at this young creature, pinned beneath the boulder and clearly dying, David found that he could not follow the protocols. He could not walk away. It took him nearly 2 hours to carefully shift the boulder. He used the tools from his emergency pack, wedging and pushing gradually, working slowly to avoid triggering a larger collapse that might crush the already injured animal. Sweat ran down his face inside his helmet. His muscles burned with effort. Several times he thought about giving up, about following protocol and moving on. But he didn't. When the boulder finally rolled aside, the young lion cub was silent for a long moment. David half expected it to attack him or run away in fear. Instead, the creature limped slowly toward him. It was clearly in pain, each movement causing it to flinch, but it came toward David anyway. When it reached him, it simply collapsed against his leg, its body shaking with exhaustion and relief. David reached down and gently touched the silver fur. It was warm and soft, almost like touching water that somehow maintained its shape. The cub made a small, high-pitched sound, not quite a purr, not quite anything David had ever heard before. "It's okay," David whispered, though he was not sure if the creature could understand him. "You're safe now. I've got you." He had no idea how wrong that statement was. He had no idea that by saving this one small creature, he had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. He only knew that he could not leave the young lion behind. David carried the injured cub back to his ship, moving carefully to avoid jostling the creature too much. The young lion was surprisingly light, no heavier than a large dog, though its four limbs dangled awkwardly as David held it against his chest. Back inside the ship's cabin, David laid the cub down on a soft piece of fabric he had salvaged from the emergency supplies. He knew nothing about treating alien animals, but he knew about treating injuries in general, and that would have to be enough. He named her Lily while he worked. The name came to him naturally as he examined her wounds. Her front left leg was broken, the bone jutting slightly against the skin. David carefully cleaned the wound with water and applied antiseptic from his medical kit. The cub flinched but did not cry out. She simply watched him with those multiple blue eyes, tracking his every movement with an intelligence that surprised him. The first night, David was not sure if Lily would survive. He sat beside her, monitoring her breathing, checking her pulse, doing everything he could think of to keep her alive. He gave her small amounts of water mixed with nutrients from his food rations. She drank eagerly, her crystalline teeth clicking softly against the metal cup. By morning, her breathing had become more regular and her eyes seemed brighter. Over the next 3 days, David fell into a routine. He would check Lily's wounds, clean them carefully, apply fresh bandages. He would talk to her constantly, telling her stories about Earth, about his childhood, about his sister Emma back home. Lily listened to every word, her eyes never leaving his face. Sometimes when he spoke, the color of her fur would shift slightly, rippling waves of silver and pale blue moving across her body like water reflecting light. On the 4th day, something extraordinary happened. David was sitting beside Lily, eating a tasteless protein bar from his emergency rations, when he felt something strange. It was not quite a sound and it was not quite a feeling. It was more like a thought that appeared in his mind without him thinking it. An image flashed across his consciousness: crystal formations, red sand, a vast group of enormous lions with eyes that glowed like stars. The image was gone as quickly as it had come, but it left David shaking. Lily was looking at him intently, her multiple eyes all focused on his face. Her fur was rippling with color again, waves of blue and silver and even hints of purple moving across her body. David understood, somehow, that she had done something to him. She had shared something with him. A memory, perhaps. Or a thought. "Did you just—" David began, but he was not sure how to finish the sentence. "Did you just talk to me? Did you just show me something from your mind?" He felt foolish speaking out loud to an alien animal, but Lily's response was immediate. She made a low humming sound and another image flashed through David's mind, this one clearer than the last. A feeling of safety. A feeling of warmth. Trust. By the end of the first week, David realized that Lily's leg had healed far faster than any human injury would have healed. The bone had knitted itself back together with remarkable speed. Lily was moving around the cabin now, her movements still somewhat careful but increasingly confident. She explored every corner of the small space, her eyes examining everything with curious intensity. David began teaching her to hunt. He took her outside the ship during the cooler parts of the day, and they searched the rocky terrain for small creatures, things that vaguely resembled lizards or rodents, though they were nothing like anything from Earth. At first, Lily watched David catch the small animals. Then, as her strength returned and her confidence grew, she began to hunt alongside him. She was fast. Incredibly fast. Her multiple eyes gave her the ability to track prey from many angles at once. Within 3 days she was better at hunting than he was. In return, Lily taught David how to survive on Zephyr 7. She seemed to understand things about the planet that David's instruments could not measure. She knew which directions the dangerous winds came from. She knew which areas of the crystal formations were unstable and likely to collapse. She knew when predators were moving through the region, even though David could see or hear nothing. Sometimes she would simply stand very still, her fur rippling with colors, and David would understand that he needed to move to a safer location. He always listened to her. But one night something changed. David was sitting outside the ship, watching the dual moons rise in the purple sky, when Lily rested her head on his shoulder. Without any warning, a flood of images crashed into his mind. This time they were different. Darker. He saw Lily as a tiny cub, surrounded by enormous adult lions. He felt her fear, her confusion. He saw the moment the adults turned away from her, driving her away from their group. He experienced the horror of being cast out, being deemed unworthy. He felt the crushing loneliness of being alone in a vast world, abandoned by everyone and everything that mattered. David gasped, tears streaming down his face. He understood now. Lily had not been lost or separated from her pack by accident. She had been deliberately abandoned, cast out because she was somehow different from the others, deemed too weak to deserve survival. David pulled Lily close, his arms wrapping around her silver fur. "You're not weak," he whispered fiercely into her ear. "You're not unworthy. You're special. You're brave. You survived. You're the strongest creature I've ever known." Lily made a soft humming sound, and her fur rippled through waves of blue. David felt the warmth of her presence beside him, the weight of her head on his shoulder. For the first time since the crash, he felt less alone. But that feeling of peace did not last long. On the 7th day, David's communication beacon suddenly crackled to life. His repair work had finally succeeded. A message came through, distant but clear. A rescue team was on its way. They would arrive in approximately 10 days. David looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in a patch of sunlight coming through the cabin window. He realized with a terrible weight in his chest that he had a choice to make. When the rescue team arrived, he could return to Earth. He could go home. But what would happen to Lily? He did not know that Lily's pack had been watching him the entire time. The sound came on the 7th night after David's beacon had activated. It was not a sound that David's instruments could measure, and it was not a sound that his ears could hear in any traditional way. It was a vibration that seemed to travel through the ground itself, moving up through his boots and into his bones. David woke up immediately, every muscle in his body suddenly tense with alertness. He had heard stories about this kind of thing, warnings from other xenobiologists who had encountered large predator species on hostile worlds. The vibration was a call. A summons. Something massive was moving across the desert toward his ship. Lily was already awake. She stood near the window of the cabin, her body absolutely rigid. Her fur was no longer the soft silver it usually was. Instead, it rippled with deep blues and purples, colors that David had never seen before. The multiple eyes around her head were all pointed in the same direction, toward the horizon. Her entire body was trembling, but David could not tell if it was from fear or something else entirely. "Lily?" David moved toward her, but she did not turn to acknowledge him. She simply stood there watching, waiting. Then he saw them. They emerged from the crystal canyons like a tide of liquid silver. 7 massive lions, each one easily 10 feet tall at the shoulder, their movements fluid and perfect and absolutely terrifying. They moved across the red sand with a grace that seemed impossible for creatures so enormous and powerful. Their fur shimmered in the light of the twin moons, and even from this distance, David could see the intelligence burning in their multifaceted eyes. The Alpha led them. She was a female, scarred across her flanks with marks that looked almost like constellations burned into her flesh. One of her eyes was clouded and blind, but the others burned with an ancient, terrible intelligence. She moved with the confidence of a creature that had never known fear, never known anything but complete dominance over her world. David's hand moved instinctively to his weapon, but even as his fingers closed around it, he knew it was useless. What good would a human-designed laser gun be against 7 creatures like these? He might manage to wound one of them before they tore him to shreds. The weapon would be a minor annoyance to them, nothing more. The pack stopped about 50 meters from the ship. They formed a perfect semicircle, blocking any possible escape route. The Alpha stepped forward slightly, her scarred face turning toward the cabin where David and Lily stood watching through the window. David felt Lily tense beside him. He placed a hand on her silver fur, trying to offer comfort or perhaps trying to draw comfort from her presence. He was not sure which. "Stay calm," he whispered, though he was not sure if he was speaking to Lily or to himself. Then something extraordinary happened. Lily moved toward the cabin door. David reached out to stop her, but she turned her head and made a soft, humming sound. An image flashed into David's mind, one of trust, of safety, of something he could not quite understand. Before David could stop her, Lily pushed the cabin door open and stepped out into the night. David's heart nearly stopped. He wanted to run after her, to pull her back inside, but something kept him rooted to the spot. He watched helplessly as Lily walked across the red sand toward the pack. The alpha watched her approach. The scarred female did not move, did not make any aggressive movements. She simply waited, her blind eye and her seeing eyes both fixed on the young cub walking toward her. When Lily was just a few meters away from the alpha, something happened that David would never forget. The enormous lion lowered her massive head. Not in aggression. Not in a hunting posture. She lowered her head in what could only be described as a gesture of respect, of reverence. Then, one by one, each of the other lions in the pack mirrored the movement. All 7 of them, these enormous apex predators, lowered their heads in submission to David's presence. Except they were not looking at David. They were looking at Lily. And through Lily they seemed to be acknowledging David as well. David stumbled out of the cabin, his mind reeling with confusion. This was not how apex predators behaved. This was not how any of his training had prepared him for this moment. The alpha raised her head and looked directly at David. In that moment, a flood of information crashed into his consciousness like a tidal wave. It was far more intense than anything Lily had ever shared with him. Images, feelings, concepts, all pouring into his mind at once. He saw vast herds of creatures crossing endless plains. He saw the pack hunting, moving as one unified organism. He saw rituals and ceremonies and a civilization far more complex than he had ever imagined. He saw Lily as a tiny cub, surrounded by other young lions, smaller and weaker than her siblings. He felt the pack's disappointment in her. He experienced their decision to exile her, to cast her out as a test of survival and strength. And then he saw something else. He saw the moment the pack had discovered that Lily was alive. He saw them tracking her, watching her bond with David. He felt their shock and wonder at the sight of a human caring for one of their own, protecting her, nurturing her, teaching her to be strong. The alpha took a step toward David, and he forced himself not to move, not to run. The enormous creature lowered her head until her face was level with his. Her blind eye was milky white, unseeing, but her other eyes burned with intensity. A low, rumbling sound emerged from deep within her chest, and David understood without words what was being communicated to him. He was a keeper of the forgotten. He was a being who had shown mercy to one deemed unworthy of survival. In the culture of these creatures, in their ancient traditions and beliefs, this made him sacred. This made him something far more valuable than he could have ever imagined. The alpha was not here to kill him. She was here to welcome him, to invite him into something greater than himself. The rescue team arrived on the 10th day, their transport ship landing in a cloud of red dust about 2 kilometers from David's crash site. David watched from a distance as the team emerged, their suits gleaming white against the harsh landscape. He recognized Captain Elena Rodriguez, the leader of the rescue operation. She had worked with David on 3 previous expeditions. She was a good person, a careful scientist, and someone David trusted. But David did not go to meet them immediately. Instead, he stood with Lily and the alpha, watching as the rescue team set up their base camp. The 7 lions remained perfectly still, their enormous bodies blending into the crystal formations in a way that should have been impossible but somehow worked. They were patient. They were waiting to see what David would do. It took David 3 hours to make his decision. He walked across the red sand toward the rescue team, leaving Lily and the pack behind. Captain Rodriguez spotted him immediately and rushed forward, her face filled with concern and relief. "David, thank God you're alive. We received your beacon signal and came as fast as we could. Are you hurt? Do you need immediate medical attention?" Rodriguez was already scanning him with her portable medical device, her voice rapid and urgent. "I'm fine, Elena," David said quietly. "I need to talk to you about something. Something that's going to change everything." It took him 2 hours to explain. He told her about the crash, about finding Lily, about the bonding that had occurred between them. He told her about the pack arriving, about the telepathic communication, about what he had learned from the Alpha about Zephyrian culture. He showed her the scars on his own skin where Lily's crystalline claws had gently marked him during their bonding ritual. He played back the recordings from his ship's cameras showing the pack lowering their heads. Rodriguez listened to everything without interrupting. When David finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she activated her communication device and called Earth. The response came back within an hour. David was authorized to stay on Zephyr 7 as humanity's first official ambassador to the Zephyrian species. It was unprecedented. It was dangerous. It was absolutely necessary. The implications of peaceful contact with an intelligent alien species were staggering. Every government, every scientific institution, every corporation on Earth wanted to be part of what came next. That evening, David brought Elena and 2 other team members to meet the pack. They approached carefully, their weapons holstered, their hands visible and empty. The Alpha watched them with her scarred face, her multiple eyes tracking every movement. When the humans were close enough, she lowered her head again and the rest of the pack followed suit. Elena gasped. One of the other team members, a young man named Robert, actually fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer presence and power of the creatures before him. "They're not going to hurt us," David said softly. "They want to talk to us. They want to understand us and they want us to understand them." Over the next week, David worked with Elena and her team to establish a basic framework for communication. They brought in linguists via satellite connection, experts in animal behavior, xenobiologists, diplomats. Everyone wanted a piece of what was happening on Zephyr 7. But David kept them all focused on one primary goal: learning to communicate with the pack in a meaningful way. It was during this time that the Alpha revealed her true identity to David through a long, intense telepathic session. Her name, translated roughly into human language, meant something like, "she who walks between worlds." She was Lily's biological mother. She had been the one who orchestrated Lily's exile. It had not been a punishment driven by cruelty but rather a test. An ancient tradition among her people to identify which cubs possessed the strength and intelligence to survive impossible circumstances. Lily had failed the test by conventional standards. She had been too weak, too small, too gentle. So the pack had cast her out, expecting her to die in the wilderness. But Lily had not died. She had been found by a human who valued her life enough to care for her. The Alpha showed David images of her people observing from a distance during those 7 days of bonding. She showed him the moment the entire pack had realized what was happening. A being from another species, another world, was showing compassion to one of their own. Not for material gain. Not for power or dominance. Simply because it was the right thing to do. This revelation had shaken Zephyrian society to its core. The Alpha had called together all the packs in the region. She had told them what had happened. And she had proposed something radical, that perhaps their ancient ways needed to change. That perhaps strength was not just about physical prowess and hunting ability. That perhaps mercy and compassion were forms of strength that they had overlooked for generations. Some packs accepted this philosophy. Others resisted fiercely. Traditionalist groups saw David as a corrupting influence, a threat to Zephyrian superiority and their way of life. Political tensions began to build. But the Alpha was patient and wise. She worked with David to establish councils where humans and Zephyrians sat together as equals. She arranged cultural exchanges where young Zephyrians could learn about human history and philosophy, and where human scientists could study Zephyrian achievements in mathematics, engineering, and art. Most importantly, she changed the law regarding exiled cubs. No longer would they be left to die in the wilderness. Instead, they would be given a chance to prove themselves in new ways. Other packs began adopting this approach. And remarkably, these packs thrived. Their societies became stronger, more united, more resilient. Young lions that would have been written off as weak became valued members of the community. Some of them became leaders. Lily herself grew into a magnificent creature, her silver fur deepening in color as she matured. She became a symbol of the new generation, a bridge between 2 worlds. She worked alongside David and the Alpha, helping to translate concepts and ideas between human and Zephyrian minds. She was, quite literally, the daughter of 2 worlds. 3 months after the rescue team's arrival, Elena approached David with news. "Earth is sending a permanent diplomatic mission," she said. "And they want you to lead it. You've done something incredible here, David. You've changed everything." David looked at Lily, then at the Alpha, then out at the vast desert of Zephyr 7 stretching endlessly before him. He thought about his sister Emma back on Earth. He thought about all the things he had left behind. Then he made his choice. He would stay. 2 years had passed since David Chen made the decision to stay on Zephyr 7. The transformation that had begun with the rescue of one small alien cub had rippled outward across the entire galaxy like waves spreading across an ocean. News of humanity's peaceful integration with an apex predator species had reached every corner of known space, and the implications were staggering. On Earth, governments and corporations scrambled to understand what had happened. A human had not conquered an alien species. He had not fought them or dominated them or extracted their resources. Instead, he had simply shown them kindness, and in return they had welcomed him as family. It was a story that captured the imagination of billions of people across dozens of worlds. The image of David standing between Lily and the Alpha beneath Zephyr 7's dual moons became iconic, reproduced on screens and in publications everywhere. It represented something that humans had been searching for since they first reached the stars. Proof that peace between different species was possible. The Zephyrians had begun calling David the Bridge, and the name had stuck across the galaxy. But David himself felt uncomfortable with the title. He was simply a man who had made a choice to help a creature in need. He had not planned to change an entire civilization. He had not anticipated that his actions would reshape interspecies diplomacy across the known universe. Yet that was exactly what had happened. Within 6 months of David's decision to remain on Zephyr 7, the Earth government officially adopted what became known as the Marcus Doctrine. Named after an ancient human philosopher, the doctrine established a new framework for contact with alien species. The primary principle was simple: always seek understanding and communication before conflict. Always assume that any intelligent species might possess wisdom worth learning from. Always approach strangers with the possibility of compassion. It was revolutionary. For centuries, humans had approached alien contact from a position of fear and power. The doctrine changed that fundamentally. Humanity suddenly had leverage in diplomatic negotiations with species that had previously viewed them as a threat or an irrelevant young race. The bridge had changed how the entire galaxy viewed humanity. Back on Zephyr 7, David had established something unprecedented: a school. The institution, which the Zephyrians called the House of Two Worlds, brought together young creatures from both species. Human children, sent on temporary assignments from Earth, learned about Zephyrian history, culture, mathematics, and art. Young Zephyrians, in turn, learned about human literature, music, philosophy, and scientific achievement. The school sat in a building that blended human architecture with Zephyrian crystal formations, a literal and symbolic representation of two species learning to live as one. Lily had become the school's director of cultural integration. She had grown into an absolutely magnificent creature, her silver fur now streaked with deeper blues and purples. She possessed her mother's intelligence and wisdom, but she had inherited something else from David as well: a deep compassion for all living things regardless of species or perceived weakness. She worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between traditionalist Zephyrian packs and those who had embraced the new philosophy of mercy and understanding. The Alpha, whom David had learned to call Guardian in the Zephyrian tongue, had surprised everyone by stepping down from her position of absolute leadership. She had reorganized the Zephyrian political system into something that resembled human democracy, though adapted to the unique needs and culture of her people. Packs that had previously been ruled by individual alphas through absolute authority now had councils where different voices could be heard. It was messy and complicated and sometimes frustrating, but it worked. And the Zephyrians, David realized, were learning to thrive under this new system. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Traditionalist packs, particularly those in remote regions of Zephyr 7, resisted fiercely. They saw the new philosophy as a betrayal of everything their ancestors had stood for. They saw David as a corrupting influence, a being who had weakened their species by introducing dangerous concepts like mercy and equality. There had been incidents, confrontations between progressive and traditionalist packs, arguments that had occasionally turned violent. The most serious crisis came in the 18th month of David's stay. A traditionalist faction, calling themselves the Keepers of the Old Way, attempted to assassinate the Alpha and seize control of the government. They saw the changes happening around them and felt threatened. They believed that only a return to absolute strength and unquestioned leadership could save Zephyrian society. The assassination attempt failed, but it revealed something important to David. Change was harder than he had anticipated. Changing an entire civilization's values and beliefs was not something that could be done quickly or easily. It required patience. It required persistence. It required people, both human and Zephyrian, willing to work toward a vision of a better future even when progress seemed impossibly slow. David had responded by deepening his work at the House of Two Worlds. He realized that the real change would not come from political decisions made in council chambers. It would come from children. From young Zephyrians and young humans growing up together, learning each other's ways, understanding each other's cultures from an early age. By the time these children reached adulthood and positions of authority, the old divisions would seem strange and unnecessary. On the evening of the 2-year anniversary of his arrival on Zephyr 7, David stood on a high crystal formation overlooking the vast desert. Beside him stood Lily and Guardian. Behind them, hundreds of Zephyrians and a newly arrived human colony gathered to celebrate a permanent alliance treaty between humanity and the Zephyrian civilization. The dual moons rose together in the purple sky, casting silver light across the gathered crowd. David thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the solar storm that had destroyed his ship. He thought about the broken cub trapped beneath a boulder. He thought about all the small choices and decisions that had led him here. The crowd began to chant, a sound that started with the Zephyrians and was slowly picked up by the humans. It was Lily's name repeated over and over, Lily, Lily, Lily. A symbol of hope. A symbol of transformation. A symbol of what was possible when different beings chose compassion over conflict. David realized in that moment that his greatest achievement was not any individual action or decision. His greatest achievement was simply having started something. By saving one small life, he had set in motion changes that were reshaping an entire galaxy. And those changes were only just beginning. As the celebration continued around him, David pulled Lily close and felt Guardian's massive head rest gently against his shoulder. He smiled, thinking of his sister Emma back on Earth, thinking of everyone who would someday hear the story of how one man's choice to show kindness had changed everything.